Somewhere in the Carolina Lowcountry, buried beneath layers of family Bibles and burned correspondence, lies evidence of a transaction that violated every law of God and man. They say the Ashley River looks harmless at first light, slack as poured pewter, a hush of cypresses leaning over it like conspirators. But on certain mornings the water holds the echo of what it has seen. Hushed footsteps, a carriage sent down a side lane to avoid notice, a woman who dressed her fear in silk and called it Providence. Her name was Catherine Rutledge, and in 1844, as heat climbed the columns of her White House and a red thrush quivered on the live oak, she weighed her dwindling chances against the customs of her class and found a way to cheat both. Cheat is too soft a word. She manufactured an heir, the way cotton planters manufactured profit, by seizing what was not hers and insisting the theft could be made respectable if performed quietly enough. Her husband, Nathaniel, had inherited the plantation 5 years earlier. 3,000 acres of bottomland stitched to the river, 143 enslaved lives recorded on paper like livestock, a ledger of births and rations and punishments as routine as rainfall. He liked to be called progressive, read journals, tried new rotations, argued about guano at dinners in Charleston. Yet when you stripped the polish from him, he believed what the men around him believed, that power repeated itself through sons, and sons had to be had by any means that could pass without scandal. The scandal was not the act itself, everyone knew. It was the admission. The woman Catherine chose was named Delilah. She had light skin and a steady hand, a literate mind, and a face that would not betray her in dim rooms. She'd been raised up to the house as a lady's maid, the sort of reassignment that makes a girl walk carefully, grateful on the surface, wary beneath. Catherine studied her the way a botanist studies a cutting, angles of cheek and brow, the set of her mouth, until Delilah felt seen through rather than seen. When Catherine began to ask about her cycle, her mother's deaths, her cramps, Delilah understood there was no safety in answers and less in refusal. The plan formed under the fan of that terrible summer. Catherine staged an illness, commissioned a cottage deep in the trees for rest, and sent away anyone too seasoned to be fooled. She spoke to Nathaniel in a room that smelled of whale oil and paper glue, and fed his pride until it was tame. The words they used could not be repeated in daylight. The acts were not named. But on 3 quiet nights in September, Nathaniel went where he had been told to go, and Delilah learned what it is to become a vessel against one's will, while still being expected to be grateful for the honor of it. When she quickened, Catherine began to pad her gowns. Rain fell the day the child came. Hard, honest rain that should have washed the world clean. Delilah labored in the shuttered cottage with an old midwife named Patience, while Catherine paced the parlor like a commander, counting the seconds between cries. The boy arrived with a furious, healthy shout. Delilah saw only the blur of a tiny mouth and the damp sheen of his hair before he was lifted away. Laudanum for the pain, a sheet yanked higher, and then silence. Catherine took the bundle to the main house and composed the moment the way one composes a portrait. Lamps lowered. Servant summoned? The new father astonished. The name decided, William Nathaniel, and the letters dispatched before the cord was cold. For 6 aching weeks, Delilah's body believed the baby was somewhere nearby and begged to feed him. For 3 months, Catherine allowed it. An arrangement so exquisitely cruel it could only have been devised by someone who feared intimacy like contagion. After, Delilah was sent to the fields. From then on, she was not to look toward the house. Anguish is a kind of weather. It sits where it pleases. The quarters learned the new climate at once, and they said nothing because saying is a privilege, and privileges are not for the stolen. The boy prospered. The lie prospered with him. Tutors, boots, the measured pride of a father who taught him rows and yields. The unwavering gaze of a mother who inventoried his features as if they were receipts. Nose like a Hammond, brow like a Rutledge, seeking reassurance that heredity could be manufactured if one watched closely enough. William's skin stayed fair, his hair straightened as it dried, and Catherine slept better than she deserved. Years build fences you cannot see until you try to cross them. By 11, William owned the place the way boys own anything, by assuming it was made for his footsteps. He liked the cooper's shop in the morning, the ring of iron on oak, the tang of cut wood. Isaac, the cooper, had hands that answered to mallet and hoop as if they'd been born knowing, and a face like old water, dark, reflective, keeping its depths to itself. One warm day in June, William asked whether Isaac had children, and something moved across the old man's eyes like a shadow over the river. "I had a daughter," he said, and returned to his work as if the words were nails that needed driving. That answer might have joined the hundreds of phrases that drifted across William's days and left no trace, if not for a second accident. The flimsy lock on Catherine's escritoire and the old journal inside it, the one with the entries torn out exactly where the world changed. The missing pages said more than pages do that survive. In what remained, Catherine's neat hand confessed a dream called Providence, a suitable candidate, and an heir to be obtained within the year. The boy put the book back and stepped into the noon light feeling as if he wore someone else's name. Knowledge, once it enters the body, searches for a door. The door opened on a fever. In August, the quarters sickened. Mosquitoes stitched their small signatures in every house. Isaac's illness lingered, valuable men receiving the doctor's call the way good mules do, reluctantly, at cost. Delilah nursed her father, sleeping on planks beside him, and on the third night William came to the window because he could not bear not to come. He did not intend to listen, only not to leave. But the night carries voices, and vows spoken for the dying have a way of ringing unlike any other sound. "You'll tell him," Isaac rasped. "Not now. Someday. You'll tell that boy what they did." The pause before Delilah's answer was longer than a prayer. When she said yes, it sounded like a door opening underwater. William knocked, or perhaps his hand simply found the latch. He asked a single question, and heard the truth from the only mouth entitled to speak it. The room was small enough that grief touched each of them without moving. Delilah told the story in the flat tone of those who have repeated pain into a kind of order. The choosing, the 3 nights, the isolation, the birth, the 2 minutes. She told him she had sung to him in the dark and that the songs had nowhere to land. She told him she had fed him while he was called someone else's, then had gone to the rouse and learned the weight of a sack with milk still drying in her body. She did not cry saying it. She had cried the ocean already. He was a child and she was his mother, and there was no law on earth to name them that way without burning down the house they stood in. So they made a new law between them and hid inside it. He would come in the margins of the day. She would tell him what the world would not. The names of people he'd never been taught to see. The invisible church where prayers were braided with whispers of roots and rivers. The jokes that kept breath moving in the belly when a back bled. The recipes that made a pot stretch. The songs that worked faster than whips at keeping a rhythm. She would tell him his lineage on the side that did not make the newspaper notices. The woman from the islands who had sung in a language that survived inside the melody long after the words were taken. The men who carved shape from wood and would not surrender the patience it required. He listened and learned to hold 2 truths in his mouth without speaking either where it could be heard. When Isaac died, the funeral hummed with old cadences and damp earth. William watched from a distance that measured not propriety but theft. He discovered there are distances one cannot cross without becoming another person, and he was not ready to die to become true. Catherine, sensing something incorrect in her son's gaze, tried to frighten him back into shape with talk of dignity and boundaries and the strange assertion that enslaved people did not feel as deeply as white people. Did a confession of her own withered heart that she mistook for social fact. William nodded and studied how a mask is made. He grew into the life laid out for him with a trader's grace. In Charleston, he learned Latin declensions and the habits of men who believed the future could be ensured by denying the present. He wrote letters to Delilah by hand and spirit, trusting them to a chain of women whose names he would never say aloud. Letters that spoke of unimportant things, rain, headaches, the price of cotton, because important things must be written into the space between lines. When he returned to the plantation to assist his father, he discovered the precise, infuriating limits of mercy. He could ease a task, temper an overseer, move a woman from rows to dairy, a boy from kiln to carpentry, and every kindness repeated the insult that allowed him to grant it at all. What he did not do was announce himself. He rehearsed it at night, standing in the church and saying Delilah's name like a bell, sitting at the dinner table and telling Catherine that a womb can be as brutal as a whip when it is used to claim what another woman made. Each time the whole edifice toppled onto Delilah first, so he learned to survive by halves, and the halves made a life that looked whole from the road. The war came and passed like a fever that does not leave all at once. The world shifted, and then pretended it hadn't. Freedom was declared by ink and contested by hands, and the fields went on needing bodies just the same. Delilah, older than her years, saw what emancipation meant when land stayed put and hunger multiplied. She worked and kept a small garden, and nursed other women's babies and laughed on porches at twilight because joy must be stubborn, or it is nothing. William married a sweet-tempered woman with a family Bible heavy enough to press out any wrinkle in a story. He had children who understood him as a white father and grew up on the scent of ironed linen, and he took care never to let them stand at an open window at night, listening. Delilah died when she was 49. It was a bright winter day, the kind of day the river looks like hammered tin. The ceremony was brief. The men shoveled, the women sang a low hymn, a child peered into the new earth as if it were a question. William stood where any man might stand who had once been a master, and wished to demonstrate respect without impropriety. And then, when the others drifted away, he did not. He stayed until the shade had crept inches across the ground, and he said the word mother out loud into a place where no one could accuse him of saying it. Everything that followed had the shape of contrition and not its substance. In his will he left something to the descendants of Isaac the Cooper. A thin coin slipped beneath a door after the house had been looted clean. He believed, poor fool, that he had sealed the story in a quiet vault he had built from silence. But silence is a porous mortar. Truth travels like water through family lines, in the way cheekbones rise in a lullaby with no known author, in the old woman's rumor she repeats in a kitchen when she's tired and has forgotten what she swore she'd never say. Today tourists walk the Oak Line Drive and pay a fee to be told about cornices and mantels. There's a plaque on the lawn that calls the house an eloquent witness to an age, which is what the guilty always say when they are trying to make their furniture take the stand. Guides speak of Sea Island cotton with the smile people use for weddings. They do not speak of the cottage or the padded gowns or the boy who learned to look both ways inside his own skin before he crossed a room. They say domestics and hands, because nouns can be trained to hide verbs, and hiding is the last craft left to a ruined myth. But the river remembers. On certain dawns it looks as if someone has written a confession on its surface and then tried to rub it out with a wet palm. If you stand long enough, you can almost hear a woman singing a song too old for translation, and a girl listening at a door no one would have allowed her to touch, and a boy asking the only question that matters, "Are you my mother?" And the answer that remakes him and does not save him, yes. What could he have done? You ask as if the past were a locked desk and we could jimmy the drawer and find a page the fire missed. He could have sacrificed himself and been right. He could have remained comfortable and been wrong. He did the third thing, the thing most of us do when faced with a ruin that still feeds us. He lived with his contradictions and named them prudence. The enslaved who watched him saw two people at once. Some pitied the child trapped in a skin that protected him from the lash and separated him from his mother. Some hated the man who used that protection daily, even when he used it to deliver small mercies. Most understood the truth terrible in its ordinariness that a lie, once it builds a house, will furnish it with children to keep itself warm. Stand, then, at the rail of the Ashley where the reeds hiss and the light comes up in layers. Imagine a ledger with a single word added in the margin beside a name. Stolen. Imagine a woman's hand, ink-stained, hesitating before she writes it. Imagine the page being torn and fed to flame and the ash caught in a draft and carried down, settling on the river like a second dawn. You can still see it if you squint. The smudge, the shimmer. Some mornings the water looks harmless. On others, it looks like a mouth learning at last how to say the thing no one wrote.